disorder. Then post-traumatic stress disorder, you all have heard about, PTSD, acute stress disorder, and adjustment disorder. And these are related in a way. We'll talk about how to distinguish those. And then, of course, the grab bag diagnostic category, other specified trauma and stress-related disorder. Reactive attachment disorder is people who are unable to actually make an attachment when they need to, like children who can't attach to their parents when there's a stressful situation, or in any situation where you would think that somebody would reach out and grab their significant others. They can't do it. It just is bizarre. And the disinhibited social engagement, I'm just telling you, y'all, I'm not going to test any of this stuff, but disinhibited social engagement disorder is people who don't have any problem making associations with people even beyond all common sense or safety. And they'll go talk to people like children who go up to strangers and get in cars with them and drive off as just kind of a matter of function. So they don't really worry about it. So just for fun, if you want to read about it or look at them, post-traumatic stress disorder gets a lot of press these days because it's been identified, and it is a fairly complex diagnosis. It's most commonly associated with the military, but it's not just the military. But I think it's gotten a lot of airtime because of all the veterans coming back from wars. And if you are a family member who's had someone who's been in war, then you will know that their behavior may not be the same when they come back. I have a brother, you see, my first cousin is married to someone who was in the Vietnam War, and he went there at the height of the war when there was just killing everywhere. And I know she was afraid he wouldn't come back. In fact, a lot of people were afraid they would not come back because when they got on that plane and left, then you thought that was it. So you have to go through your own stress of it. But when he came back, he had 2 tours as a Marine in Vietnam. And I don't even know all of what he saw because he won't talk about it. And when he came back, he was very much a different person, very regressive and withdrawn and kind of inward. And he will talk to people one-on-one and be very, affable and friendly, but he has to get down to that space where it's one-on-one. But if you get him into big crowds of people, he is going to drift away and disappear into another room. He will not do that. Weddings are a terrible place for him to be. So he usually will either not come or be there for just a little bit and then get out. And then where's so-and-so? Well, they're at is too many people. And in Vietnam, the big deal about Vietnam is everybody looked the same. Enemies, and this is not a racist statement. You couldn't tell if they're Viet Cong or if they're, Vietnamese democratic fighters, freedom fighters. You just didn't know. So you're going along in crowds of people, and somebody can pull out a machine gun and blast you, and so you get very wary about being around people. Anyway, so let's just look at this. The diagnostic criteria, this really is a multiple step diagnosis, and when you hear it, you'll understand, but it's complex. It's not just a simple diagnosis to make. We actually have a person with PTSD who lived in our neighborhood, and he actually would hide out under the bed. His mother actually created a support group in Edmond for folks with PTSD or children with PTSD. He's a veteran, and he came back. And you might see him every once in a while, but every time you saw him, it was kind of scary because he was very afraid of you. And he would be under the bed, peep out of the curtain, never come out, had a really hard time coming out and being okay. Let's see here. Okay, so here's the criteria. There has to be an exposure to actual or threatened death, or exposure to serious injury, or experience of sexual violence in one or more of the following ways. Here's the ways the exposure can happen. They can directly experience it, okay? You can be raped, you can be shot, you can have somebody come after you with a knife and you can survive and escape, but that's the trauma. You can witness in person the events as it occurred to others. So you could be in the war and not be one shot, but all of your friends over there got mowed down or a grenade landed in the middle of them, and you saw that. You could learn that the traumatic events occurred to a close family member or close friend, so you could just learn about it. You don't even have to have been there, but just learn about it. In the cases of actual threat and death of the family member or friend, the events must have been violent or accidental. Okay? And then another one, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to aversive details of the traumatic event. For example, a first responder collecting human remains, like in the Merle building bombing here. I know people who were there and have been affected that way. Police officers repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. Some people who are in occupations where they actually end up with PTSD as a matter of their job. One is to work in the emergency room. You work in the emergency room and you see car wreck victims come in there, and then you see how the families react, and that might be too much if it's just over and over again. Or policemen, like they've got here, any number of things. This does not apply to exposure through electronic media, TV, movies, or pictures unless this exposure is work-related. Now, isn't that saying something about America today? There's so much violence that you can see on TV that that's not the exposure. It would have to be somebody, you have to be doing your job where you do that, or you have to be involved yourself or have a family member or be told about a family member. It doesn't count if it's just TV or movies. I thought that was kind of a sad statement in the diagnostic criteria. Here's another one. Presence of one, and these are all and. You have to have this and this. Presence of one or more of the following intrusion symptoms. That's a term you'll need to be aware of. Intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic events beginning after the event occurred. So after something bad's happened, you have these symptoms. A lot of things. They can be memories, recurrent, involuntary, and intrusive, distressing memories of the event. Just can't keep it from flooding into your brain. Dreams, distressing dreams in which the content or the affect of the dream are related to the traumatic events. Doesn't have to be the exact event, but it can be somebody was murdered, and it can be death of some sort that's part of the dream picture that goes on. Dissociative reactions. I don't think we talked about dissociation, but a dissociative reaction can be a flashback in which the individual feels or acts as if the traumatic events were recurring. Such reactions may occur on a continuum, with the most extreme expression being a complete loss of awareness of present surroundings. I'll give you an example at the end of the slide. Intense or prolonged psychological distress and exposure to triggers that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the traumatic events, or marked physiologic reaction. So you can have a psychological distress or a physiologic reaction to a trigger, which is either internal, something that you have thought of and imagined, and then you have this reaction, or something from the outside comes in and moves off. I'm going to make one political commentary about this. The word trigger is overused today. It's kind of like, oh, that's a trigger. I need my safe space. This is not just like, okay, please, y'all have got to grow it up a little bit. But there's a range of that. Some people use the word trigger as a way to actually control you, because it's not that big of a deal, but it's a way to make you do something else. So I just think it's just out there. And I kind of resent it, because I think it really disservices what a real trigger is to people who actually have problems, who do need help. Sorry, I just have to say, because it's part of understanding this. The words are bandied around. Okay, here, okay. On this one, here's the classic example. When I worked at the Oklahoma City VA, we had lots of veterans, and they would be, and the mental health clinic was actually in a separate part of the building, because this is part of the stigma and bias. They didn't want to put mental health patients in the same waiting room with people who were quote unquote normal, because it could create problems or not draw the clientele in. So they had to be over here, and then everybody else was over here in the urgent care, side. So over on the mental health wing, the VA in Oklahoma City is right by the helicopter pad for Children's Hospital. So when the helicopter would come in with trauma patients, you'd hear all these choppers coming in. It was a pretty loud noise, because it actually came right down and just landed right across the street. And there would be people who would hit the floor, get under chairs. flatten out. And the first time I saw it, a little stupid, little naive person kind of walked out and thought, what? It scared you to death, but you know, and there would be several people who do that, and they said, oh, this is just, I got used to this, okay? So I kind of figured it out. But that's a trigger that caused a flashback, and it was a dissociative reaction because they didn't really know that they weren't in Vietnam anymore and they had to take cover so that they wouldn't get hurt in some way. Another aspect of this is there has to be a persistent avoidance of the stimuli associated with the traumatic events beginning after the traumatic event, as evidenced by one or both of the following: avoidance of or efforts to avoid distressing memories, thoughts, or feelings about or closely associated with the event. How do you avoid distressing memories? How do people try to do that? Drugs, alcohol, mind altering. Okay, so the events, the memories are so distressing that they have to find a way to make the memory not come, so they'll work with alcohol or drugs. And I would say in the moment that they're doing alcohol or drugs, they probably are in a different space. And as soon as they come back to full awareness, then they may be in that bad place again. So there's a high association and comorbidity of drug abuse and alcohol abuse in people with PTSD simply because they're trying to help themselves the best way they can. Or they avoid or have efforts to avoid external reminders. They don't get around certain people. They avoid people. They stay away from certain places. They try to avoid conversations about it. They avoid activities, objects, situations, anything that can bring about that distressing memory. So their lives become fairly narrow because if this distressing event is some big thing that happened in public, like a Merle building bombing, you may never want to go to a public space where people are gathered, never go to a federal building, never go to any place where you don't have any control over everything around you. So the only way to avoid it is not to go around it. Some folks will never go by that building. Some people will never drive downtown. Some people cannot do that anymore. Some people won't go to cemeteries. You know, if there's a link to somebody that was buried there, so I can't go there because I'll think about somebody. Or a song will come on the radio, and that'll be the song, you know, and they have to not hear that song anymore. There's more. So just a big diagnosis. Negative alterations in cognitions or mood associated with the traumatic events beginning or worsening after that event, as evidenced by two or more of the following. So they have a negative alteration in the way they think and process information or in the way their mood is manifested. So they could have an inability to remember an important aspect of the event, so they have amnesia, dissociative amnesia. Persistent, exaggerated negative beliefs or expectations. I am the one. I'm bad. No one can be trusted. The world is completely dangerous. They may actually believe that it's what they did. For example, persistent distorted cognitions about the cause or consequence of the traumatic event. You're in Vietnam, your friends got hand grenaded. If I had done this, if I had gone there, I should have done this, I should have done that. It's my fault. And it won't be their fault. That leads to a persistent negative emotional state: fear, horror, anger, guilt, or shame. Feelings of detachment or estrangement from others. Now, my first cousin's husband, I would say, has issues with detachment and estrangement. It's not huge, but it's not normal either. It's just not quite right. Persistent inability to experience positive emotions. Inability to be happy, satisfied, or loving, or have loving feelings. So those people may not be able to get married because they could never attach to somebody. Or if they were married, their marriages often fail because they simply cannot function anymore. And here's more. See, this is a gigantic grab bag diagnosis. Marked alterations in arousal and reactivity associated with the event, and it can be evidenced by two or more of the following. Irritable behavior, angry outbursts, no provocations, reckless or self-destructive behavior, driving cars very fast, under the influence of alcohol, sitting in the middle of a street, rocking your feet over the ledge of a building that's 10 stories up. I mean, just stuff like that. And I think in some ways, in their mind, they may be thinking it would be better if I were dead, and so it's just on the edge of not existing anymore. by choice. Hypervigilance. That's the veterans of the VA. As soon as they hear it, they're all tuned up, hyped up. As soon as they're ready to go, and they live like that. The people who sit in the house always watching the driveway up the road. I'm just watching because I don't know who's going to drive up here and get me. Exaggerated startle response. It's like when somebody touches you, just go off, just like, right. You didn't expect that kind of response. Problems with concentration and sleep disturbances of every variety. These disturbances have to be more than 1 month. Causes clinical significant distress and is not caused by something else. Okay, so what's it like to have PTSD? I hope these video clips help because there's so much you can say, but I think you get it better when you hear somebody talking about it. It's
like living with a leash on a little bit. You can do some stuff, but every now and then you remember that it's there.
I was living in Japan during the earthquake in 2011.
A few weeks and months of political unrest while I was living overseas. We lived with bags by the door ready to go in case we needed to get out.
I found out in 2008 I had PTSD, complex PTSD, but I think the diagnosis should have probably been made when I was 14 years old.
I was raped, and as a result, I live with PTSD.
The civil war in Lebanon broke out in 1975. I was only 17 years old. I lived through that for about 12 years.
As it kind of sunk in, I started to feel really guilty because I had always associated PTSD with people who had been to war, and I just didn't think I deserved it. The PTSD triggers, they ambush you. You don't know when it's gonna come. It's sort of the unknown. Every day you wake up and you don't know if you're going to have a trigger today.
I was at a movie and there's a part where this woman got trapped in a car. I had a serious panic attack.
There's a song that was talking about like shooting and armed robbery, and just hearing that song, that was all it took.
Something happened when I was 13, and when my trigger happens, in that moment, I am 13.
Usually the sounds of jet planes overhead would trigger off the memory for me of those days. It would make me feel weak in the legs, and my memory will go back to that time trying to look after my children when they were little and protect them. Yeah, all I have to do is hear a jet plane and that's where my mind will go.
At times, it has literally felt like I'm dying. You feel like you're never gonna get past this. One of the things that's helped me a lot was group therapy. This happens to more people than you think.
Start to have a conversation with this thing that you have.
I did counseling for 2 years in college, and it felt like that got my life into a pretty manageable place.
I am trying to build up the courage to attend a support group.
I would have these days where you're just like, there's nothing I can do to do anything that you're supposed to do. In group therapy, someone called it a lost day. It's such a simple thing, but putting the words lost day to those days helped me overcome.
And I think accepting that is really important, and just being like, it's okay to freak out and just be like, oh, this is scary, because it's scary.
And don't ever tell them to get over it because it's extremely painful.
It takes practice, and it takes patience, and it takes faith. You have to know that the fact that you've been through something so traumatic and you're here, you are much stronger than you think you are. Don't feel guilty when you have a good day.
Give yourself time to heal.
You can't judge yourself for it.
It'll never be the same, but it can get better, and it's worth whatever it's gonna take. You can have a better life.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. You just got to find the right thing that works for you.
And getting help is not a sign of weakness. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage, and you deserve the happiness that comes with getting better.
My name is Kate.
My name is Tammy.
My name is Kirk, and I live with PTSD.
take 10. I didn't realize I was right on my line, so let's just take 10 minutes to kind of run around, move. Is it getting hot in here, y'all? This is not like it has been all week. I mean, it's like it's better over there than